It's the end of January as I record this. It'll probably be February by the time it goes up. So of course this is my end of year list for 2023. It's tradition. That's because I'm still buying toys right up until December 31st. Some of which may have potential to make it to this video. For those of you who are new around here, or those of you who may need a reminder, I list my top 5 favourite and top 5 frustrating toy buys from the previous 12 months. Now, these are items that I've bought for myself to add to the collection, so that leaves out gifts or anything I find on my regular bargain hunts that I end up throwing into my sale pile for the toy fair. I flip a lot of cool stuff. Anyway, that criteria helps me narrow down my choices. Because I don't do regular reviews, this ends up being a nice little roundup that highlights all the stuff I think might be worth talking about. Going through my list, I realised I actually bought fewer toys and collectibles in 2023, or at least fewer that I thought were worth highlighting. I say that as I look at the pile of unopened boxes in the corner over there. There's going to be a few odd ones on here, and quite possibly a few surprises too. This isn't a best and worst list. If it were, then the shitty algorithm might actually help me out for once. It's not always about the objective quality of the toy or collectible. I also talk about the experience surrounding said toy. It's not always a case of thing good or thing bad. For example, Star Trek First Contact 1/6 scale Captain's Chair by X06. High-end collectibles are always a bit of a tough one to add to these lists. I love a bargain. I love paying as little as possible for things, so the price is often a major factor in my enjoyment of these toys, if that's even what you can call some of these. More on that later. That might sound a little unfair in this particular context, so let me put it another way. If I spend a lot of money on something, then I expect to get my money's worth. I don't think I quite got my money's worth with this mini replica. Don't get me wrong, I love the work done by X06, the quality, the fidelity, the ease in which I can pre-order directly from them, as well as their dedication to maintaining the high standards for the Star Trek brand. Go watch my other 2 videos about the Captain Picard and Locutus figures, where I pretty much gush all over them. As with this Captain's Chair, I really love and appreciate the work done here too, but I do wonder why it costs as much as one of their standard figures. I'm not privy to any of the behind the scenes goings on, but as a reasonable person, I can certainly make a few assumptions about the design process, the manufacturing, obtaining all the IP permissions, maybe, as well as the company obviously needing to turn a profit. And with that, I can be a little more understanding, and yet the vibe is still off. Okay, that's a little unsatisfactory. I feel as though I can do more with an articulated figure than I can with a static prop, and the price should probably reflect that. I got this gaming chair from Kmart in the clearance section for $100, which was half the retail price. This tiny replica cost a little more than 3 times what I paid for this chair. Actually, this replica costs more than many full-size gaming chairs. It's a completely odd comparison to make, yet you kind of get my meaning about perceived value. Well, what about the replica itself? It's gorgeous, as expected from X06. The accuracy, the fidelity is amazing. It has lights, it plays sounds from the film First Contact, and it's powered by USB. Oh, it's kind of like mine. There's also a spare swap-out cushion, and that's because while you can scale down the size of something, you can't always scale down the physics and how things interact. The second cushion has a permanent bum groove for the good captain, so it looks a little more correct. I still haven't opened mine, but I love the consideration, which they could easily have left out. Now, there is a potential problem with the swapping out of these seats. I saw another collector post about how on his, the magnets that keep the cushion in place had torn off. Like many adult collectibles, you kind of have to be a little more careful with these things. But even as careful as I was, I almost experienced the same problem when I heard the tiniest of tearing, or at least the glue coming apart from the vinyl. Fortunately, I was able to stop before it happened, but still, if you're paying hundreds of dollars, then a tiny magnet should not be a potential issue. Some have also complained about the volume of the sound bites being too soft. That's less of an issue for me, and I've talked about the solutions for it in my Locutus video where this pops up as a guest star, so go check that out. I've praised XO6 in the past and continue to do so, not only because of their quality, but also for not being as expensive as their contemporaries. But I reckon this replica, as much as I enjoy it, is slightly overpriced, making it one of the few blemishes on an otherwise stellar record. Doctor Who 1/6 scale, 12th Doctor by Big Chief Studios. Halfway through 2023, UK-based Big Chief Studios went into liquidation, a victim of the global pandemic and the cost of living crisis. They had licenses to make 1/6 scale figures from a variety of British properties, and Doctor Who is where they made their name. I like their work, but I don't think they were quite on the same level as their competition, so it was difficult to justify paying the same high-end price for a Big Chief Studios product. The one Doctor Who figure I wanted was, unfortunately, a con exclusive, and apparently they only made 100 of them. It tends to go for about $1,000 these days. So I decided to kit bash my own. From memory, it only cost me about $150. Big Chief had a spares and kit bash section on their website where I got a few accessories for mere peanuts, even with international postage. This is my first attempt at miniature tailoring, so this jacket is kind of fugly. However, I was lucky to score this updated head sculpt for about, what was it, $40 a few years back, and the eBay seller just happened to live a couple of suburbs over. Now, I might have been content with my efforts had this bargain not popped up. Oh, let's put this here. This is the re-release of the original 12th Doctor figure Big Chief produced. It's the one that has slightly fewer accessories, different base, and different packaging. I had noticed an interstate seller on eBay was slowly listing their collection one by one. As one Doctor Who figure was sold, the next one would go up, all of them at half retail price. So I waited patiently for what I assumed and hoped would be the listing for 12, and sure enough, there he was, at half retail, and I had a discount code. This was before Big Chief Studios made their announcement, so I was pretty lucky in that regard. Others have been asking way more than recommended retail now. I'm not much of a customizer, so I like things to be at their default most of the time. So I'm pleased by this, and yet there's the tiniest hint of disappointment I didn't get the original release with more accessories. And although I prefer the updated head sculpt, I don't mind the Series 8 version with the shorter back and sides. I don't want to be one of those collectors, but the head sculpts from Big Chief were a little hit and miss. They more or less work, but again, they're not quite on the same level as Hot Toys or XO6. Similar with the tailoring, but that's such a difficult thing to master, and my own attempts have been woefully lacking. In the way it scales, the way the clothes drape and fit, I think the best way to describe it is that Big Chief's tailoring ends up looking like really good doll clothes as opposed to properly scaled outfits. Take a look at these Starfleet uniforms by XO6 and they're just immaculate and so very convincing. Look, half this video is going to be me nitpicking about weird shit, even the stuff I like, but I promise I'm not going to turn this into the garbage fire that is the comments section of the Hot Toys Facebook page. The point I'm trying to make is that even with so many 7s, when their contemporaries are giving 9s, getting this at half price balances things out. This actually happened once before when I picked up the 1/6 scale Clara Oswald from Zing, also at half price. 12 is my favourite Doctor, so it's just wonderful to get this for the collection. Star Trek Nerf Starfleet Phaser Blasters by Hasbro. Star Trek toys have a notoriously checkered history. Okay, sure, Star Wars began its merchandising empire with Uncle George and Kenner Toys selling empty boxes with IOUs to an entire generation of kids. But when it came to Trek, the last 50 years of merch have been spotty and inconsistent. This phaser rifle continues that tradition. I'll get this one out of the way first. The Type 2 phaser, basically the hand pistol of TNG, is a little misshapen, a little out of proportion, and only fires one dart at a time, but I kinda don't mind it. I have the better Playmates versions from the 90s, but this is still surprisingly adorable. This isn't the problem. Now I, like so many other people, have this part of my lizard brain that feels good when holding something like this. But even when it comes to fictional firearms, I fully realise that the need to highlight that it's just a toy, for obvious reasons. With Nerf blasters and the like, that's usually done with either bright colours, exaggerated proportions, or obvious logos. Not only have all three been used here, they've also decided to Borgify the design and make it look as though the rifle has been assimilated. My initial reaction when I unboxed this was positive. It still kind of is, because feeling, and I saw this as part of the playful vibe. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised there was an inconsistency, and it started to irk me. This comes from Nerf's LMTD, or limited range. We're dropping too many vowels here. A range that's meant to be about licensed, sometimes iconic pop culture replicas that are made to shoot foam darts. These are for the collectors. Colours aside, I can't claim that all these blasters are 100% accurate to their originals, but even at a cursory glance, they look the part, and that's the entire point. A bonus is that they can even be used as part of a cosplay with or without a repaint. I include without because safety and peace of mind in public spaces is important. As far as I can tell, the phaser rifle becomes the outlier. In fairness, if you were to repaint this in the appropriate colours, much of this disappears. Also, if you're right-handed, you can cover up some of the Borg greeblies, and there's less on this side if you're left-handed, I guess. But it feels like extra effort compared to the others, and isn't as appealing to display. Thematically and aesthetically, it's meant to make it more playful, but honestly, it has zero effect on its function as a toy. And again, considering its price range, can you even call it a toy? That's what amplifies this issue. It's from Nerf's high-end collection, which means high-end prices. I was fortunate to get this for 20% off when Geelong-based Pop Culture had their sale on everything Hasbro. So that tempers things a little for me, but it also continues this other tradition about Star Trek toys and the perceived collectability instead of just being toys. Back in the 90s, it wasn't enough that Playmates was making great toys. They had to slap on these bullshit gold collector's edition labels on them, implying some sort of rarity. The following decade, Art Asylum and Diamond Select made some of their figures exclusives, which in turn made completing a specific Trek crew difficult for a lot of fans. Years later, all the manufactured scarcity by both companies gives resellers the wrong impression, and they inflate prices based on that false notion. If there were a basic version, like the Mandalorian rifle, then I'd be less annoyed, but last year I was frustrated at how overpriced that was for how little it offered. Your mileage may vary, but the Halo Assault Rifle, also by Nerf, is my go-to dart blaster, my yardstick of comparison. It's motorized, it's robust, it looks and feels the part thanks to its fidelity to the original design. Because it's not part of Nerf's limited range, it's readily available where most toys are sold, and it's less than a quarter of the price of anything in the high-end range, including the Needler, also from Halo. It might be missing lights and sounds, but it offers pretty much the same play value as the phaser rifle, with the advantage of being cosplay ready, and I'd even say collector ready. Maybe another company has the license to make a proper replica of the phaser rifle. I don't know, but the need to be extra. Are the young people even saying that? And at the price they're asking, it does taint the experience just a tad. Barbie, the movie toys by Mattel. I loved the Barbie movie. Okay, sure, I originally wanted to see it because of Margot Robbie, but then I really wanted to see it because all the man babies online were having a cry about it. It was a fun, funny, and insightful film. Some well-meaning folk have criticised it for being too basic about its feminism, but honestly, some of us idiots need an easy-to-reference cheat sheet. Anyway, when I enjoy something enough, I want to represent it in the collection, but it was quickly made apparent that most of the movie toys would be part of the collector's range, despite being made available at most of the usual retailers. Most of Barbie's looks go for 99 Aussie dollars, and many of the retailers were doing online only for these dolls. Except for this one, the Perfect Day pink gingham dress. This and Beach Ken came out first and are still pretty much everywhere for about $50 give or take. All the $99 dolls sold out far too quickly in their first go, and it wouldn't be another 4 months until other affordable dolls like the roller skating ones in the pink jumpsuit would pop up. Because of the prices and the difficulty in getting these, I was sort of resigned to narrow down my goal for this, and so at the very least, I'd get the gingham dress Barbie and the pink Corvette. Anything else after that would be a bonus. The Corvette I got from Target, and they had the cheapest price out of all of them. And then they had a 20% off toy sale. This car is pretty sweet. Yes, it's a toy car of a toy car, but I'm kind of impressed by the fidelity of it all. I use that word a lot instead of accuracy because I feel it's more appropriate, and it pairs well with this Barbie, which has a pretty good likeness for a rather basic doll. I did finally get my hands on one of the $99 dolls. Toymate opened a new store last year, and at their grand opening, they had a whole range of them. But I did have to make a difficult choice and settle on this one. I got 5% off, and I reckon she's staying in the box for now. Some of you might be wondering why a fat old guy like me is talking about toys meant for little girls. Well, we've been over this. Setting aside the rather outdated gendering of toys, when you really examine things, there's a little difference between a fashion doll and a 1/6 scale figure. I mean, they're roughly the same scale, they have removable clothes, the number of joints might be different, but some of them have similar articulation. And in the case of these movie dolls, the toned down likeness can be attributed to the fact that you're not paying hundreds of dollars for that accuracy. If you're a Barbie fan on TikTok, then you've surely stumbled across all these videos of collectors repainting the face on these, and many of the results are fan-bloody-tastic. Whatever name you attach to them, be it action figure, high-end collectible, or museum-quality replica, these are all basically dolls. And the older I get, the less I have a problem with that. Transformers, Titan Class, Legacy Evolution, Decepticon Nemesis by Hasbro. I almost lumped in a few other Transformers into this spot. You may see them pop up later. I mentioned last year that I finally stopped having that fear of missing out when it comes to these toys. That lack of FOMO has tempered my expectations, and that's partly thanks to JB Hi-Fi getting stock in earlier and more consistently than anyone else around here. Although now going into 2024, that looks to be in danger, but we'll see. JB Hi-Fi is where I got the Decepticon Nemesis from. Now, I don't hate the Autobot arc, but it was kind of lacking for the price being asked, and I kind of learned my lesson with that one. So I wasn't in much of a rush for Nemi here, and I left it for a few months. Eventually, the Black Friday sales roll around, which are still kind of new around these parts, and they last for a week or two. In the lead up, I checked around and noticed that even before discount, JB's had the best price. However, their website said they were all out of stock in Adelaide. I knew there was still one sitting on the back wall of one of their stores. I saw it for myself a day earlier, and I had a hunch the other collectors don't frequent there. Sure, I could have ordered on their website, but the cost of postage would have eaten into the Black Friday discount, and it was a short drive from my place anyways. So, on the morning of the start of the sales, I rocked up to that JB store just as doors opened at about 8 AM, with only one other customer around. I made a beeline for the back wall, grabbed Nemesis, and got my 20% discount. I was pretty chuffed, and I think I was back home by like 8:30. Two things. The JB store much closer to me also had it in stock, but they only brought it out in time for the sale, and for some reason it still didn't register on the website as in stock. That store is notorious for that. And it took me another 5 weeks before I got around to opening this anyway. That's a long preamble just for me to say that the Nemesis transformation is kinda shit. In fairness, Hasbro did learn a couple of things from their mistake with the Ark. For instance, the gun turrets aren't static and stuck in place this time, and there aren't any weirdly distracting cavernous areas either. I do love half this toy, the ship mode. It looks like such a wonderfully high-def rendition of the Decepticon vessel we saw in G1, as well as that finale of Beast Wars. It's appropriately menacing. There are these cool little launch bays where you can park the included tiny seekers, and a tiny little design feature in the way the ventral fin actually splits and folds so it can sit unassisted. Like the Ark, I don't mind the big dumb robot. It looks fine, but it doesn't really do much for me. I kinda wish they made it into Trypticon like how the reverse happened in the Fall of Cybertron video game. But that's potentially throwing away money instead of having a separate HasLab product that can sell to the masses. What shits me is the transformation. It just sucks. Some of the ratcheting joints get stuck and a few of the locking tabs don't line up. With one of the legs, you can't see the tabs in order to adjust accordingly. Like, how much effort went into this just for the tolerances to be off? I don't recall it being like this with the Ark, but it did remind me of all those videos of people struggling to transform the HasLab Unicron. My FOMO for that toy disappeared so fast, I thought I needed Viagra. Like so many fans, I used to share the sentiment of these being two toys in one. Like, what's the point of a Transformers toy that doesn't transform? But I eventually grew out of that mindset because, as I've mentioned many times elsewhere, it's always been a bit of a crapshoot on which end gets the priority, the robot or the vehicle. The car mode might look cool, but the robot feels like an afterthought or vice versa, and we end up paying extra for the privilege. Rarely are both ends shit. I'm looking at you, Power of the Primes Optimus. It's a Transformers toy, so it needs to transform, is the mindset that dictated the designs of both the Nemesis and the Ark. The effort designing and engineering a robot mode that ends up being underwhelming for the sake of two toys in one mantra, that feels like a waste. And if the process to get to the second toy is not even that fun to begin with, then why should I even bother? Aside from that shitty War for Cybertron trilogy on Netflix and the far superior Fall of Cybertron video game, I could be wrong, but I don't think there is any other media that depicts these ships as Transformers, so the effort could have been spent on other features like lights and sounds and maybe even lowering the cost. But even with the transformation, those elements could have been implemented in a toy as big as a Titan class. This costs less and does more than the captain's chair, but the more isn't done that well. Like the Ark, I'm moderately resigned to keeping the Nemesis in ship mode. It looks better that way. Appleseed Ex Machina 1/20th scale snap kit Dunan Newt by Hot Toys. I do get confused by Appleseed's place in the world of anime because it feels like it's both massively well known and yet bizarrely obscure. It might actually be the disconnect between actual Japanese fans and those fucking weebs in the West. Actually, whenever said mayonnaise weebs see Briarios, they instantly think of Chappie when the director Neil Blomkamp actually openly admitted that Chappie was directly inspired by Briarios. Weird tangent. Anyway, I stumbled upon the CG movie back in 2004 on SBS one night, if memory serves, and I really dug it. Went out and bought the DVD Steelbook, really enjoyed the 2007 sequel Ex Machina, and I think I finally fell in love with it with 2014's Appleseed Alpha, which I think is either a prequel or a reboot. Weirdly, I haven't indulged in the other iterations. There's a 1988 OVA. There was a series about 10 years ago I skipped. I found a volume of the original manga at Savers years back, and I still haven't cracked it open. My interest is narrow and relatively casual, although I do have a few Appleseed figures, including these Ex Machina ones from Hot Toys, of all companies. These 1/20th scale figures are like Gachapon or Kinder Surprise. They come disassembled and you can just snap the pieces together. Each figure comes with a component of the landmate or mech suit. These days, the complete set can fetch upwards of $1,000 on eBay. I found most of this lot in 2018 at Savers, including their boxes, even a doubled up figure, as well as the landmate. All up, I paid less than $30. Unfortunately, one of the more important figures, Dunan Newt, the actual main character, was missing. Almost exactly 5 years later, I would finally get Dunan from an eBay seller in Thailand at a price I was comfortable with, because she tends to go for way more than a tiny fig like this should. It was still a bit of a splurge, but I think I had cash left over from not really being able to spend as much as I normally would at the Mega Toy Fair. For a figure of this size, it's surprisingly detailed and accurate to the movie. Yeah, it's a bit fiddly when it comes to her accessories, but that's more to do with the scale of this versus my fat fingers. There is a satisfying sense of completion and accomplishment with obtaining Dunan, and that's pretty much why this makes it to the favourites list. Batman 1989 Grapnel Launcher by NECA Toys. This one broke within minutes of unboxing. Yep, straight to the point. Because of the manufacturing process, this part of the grapnel needed to be moulded separately and attached later, but the glue didn't hold and it came apart even before I took it out of the plastic. While installing the batteries, I was fastening the cover, and without any effort at all, the part of the threading hole for the screw broke and dropped into the chamber. You can actually still hear it rattling around in there. It usually doesn't affect the functioning of the launcher, but funnily enough, while writing the script, I was double checking to make sure my memories of this were still correct, and the little motor that retracts the cable stopped working, despite the batteries still being fresh. I literally had to smack it for it to work again. Speaking of batteries, it takes these awkward little LR1 cells, which aren't difficult to find, but not as common as AAA's, which makes little sense because this launcher is just a smidge wider than two AAA's. While this does come under the banner of Prop Replica, it's made by NECA Toys, so there is an implication of some play value. I don't know, I'm trying to avoid using the word toyetic now because it sounds a little overused and hackneyed, but like the Nerf phaser rifle, we're back at that discussion about toy versus collectible. Of course, I don't mean play as in give it to a child to play with, but none of this should be breaking through standard handling and operation, regardless of how affordable this was and what category it falls under. NECA's choice in plastic, or maybe the decision to make it as thin as it is, it never really bothered me before recently. You look at something like their Arkham Origins launcher, and this feels rather substantial. I mean, sure, it looks nice, and perhaps the whole point of it is to keep it on display, but as I said, it should be able to hold up to general handling and operation. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Movie Samurai Turtles, and Quarter-Scale Cartoon Leonardo by NECA Toys. I will go to my grave defending this movie. Story time. Don't get me wrong. Back in the day, I thought I hated the third live-action Ninja Turtles movie. I reckon I might have been 12 by the time I saw it, by the time it made it over here. Years later, around the turn of the millennium, so I'm about 19, I decided to watch this film again, and seeing it with fresh eyes, I really enjoyed it for what it was. A fun TV budget flick aimed at younger audiences. Dare I say it, as an adventure, it's objectively better than the tonally disconnected Secret of Use. That's even before we even get to how problematic Vanilla Ice is. It was also around that time I was on the internet more and reading message boards and such, and when it came to opinions on this movie, I noticed a few things. When this film came out, Ninja Turtles fans, like myself, were becoming tweens or even teenagers. they weren't necessarily gonna click with a film clearly aimed at kids. The first film, apart from being legitimately great, had an edge to it, so the appeal lasts longer as the fans grow older. Second, almost every negative opinion began with criticising the animatronic turtle suits. You can still see so many people hold on to that very opinion today on various review aggregates. It's the first issue they bring up, and the problem is, they can't seem to move beyond that single point. That's the be-all and end-all of their perspective. I thought that way too back then, but I was 12. Like I said, watching so many years later, with the benefit of hindsight, gave me a new appreciation for this film. Also, just being a reasonable, slightly level-headed grown-up made me notice more positives that I ignored the first time. Nostalgia makes me look back a lot, but many of my attitudes remain in the past. All that backstory simply adds context and enhances these already awesome action figures. I reckon I've become a broken record in these end-of-year lists because I do seem to be praising NECA every year on their Ninja Turtles output. Insert here my usual spiel about fidelity and detail. These look amazing, like they've stepped off the screen. Especially enjoy the engineering of these helmets, the simple pressure fit mechanism that allows them to stay on the heads instead of sitting there and waiting to fall off at the slightest angle. Understandably, there's been so much emphasis on the Secret of the Ooze releases. You know, things going in order, and I get that. This jumped the queue for 2023 because of the movie's 30th anniversary and was a Comic-Con exclusive in the US. Fortunately, NECA had the foresight to allow an allocation of these to be pre-ordered beforehand for those of us unable to attend. They've now done their usual thing where they've repackaged these in 2-packs, but those haven't made it on this side of the world and sadly may not do. The way NECA made this relatively accessible, as well as a few other items, does make it infuriating when they persist with store or region exclusives for other releases. This might have made it further up the list had I not had to Sophie's choice it again between this and the con exclusive Kino, but I just couldn't justify getting both at the same time. Even when paying in installments, my cash needs to get me through to the next week. But setting that aside, I'm so pleased to have these, and I hope there are plans to continue this line. I've got 2 of these big fellas, but this one right here is my actual childhood Leo. I've somehow been able to keep him with me for over 3 decades. Yes, Leo is my favourite, and up until a few years ago, this was the only original giant turtle figure I had. I think I'm kind of doing same with this giant Leo here too, lumping him into the number 2 spot. The 1/4 scale Leonardo is also by NECA Toys, and as I've said before, I don't have the same level of attachment to the original cartoon, despite it being my introduction to Ninja Turtles back in the day, like so many other kids. So I wasn't paying attention to the previous cartoon releases, but when it came to my boy here, I kinda had to. And I'm glad I did. Through matching of the colours as well as the feel of the plastic, this gives off the same vibe as the original Giant Turtles figures, only elevated, and I reckon that's exactly the point. I really love the way you can swap out the facial expressions too, the same system they applied to the Disguise 4-pack. In hindsight, I kinda wish they did that for the 1/4 scale movie Turtles, which was my original focus. Speaking of their 1/4 scale figures, I tend to get a little anxious trying to ratchet some of the joints because of their propensity to snap. These katanas also feel a tad brittle, especially when you compare them to the original one. I was fortunate to save about $50 on this because I had loyalty points with Pop Culture that I finally cashed in. So that lifts my opinion about this just a little too. I reckon the only problem I have now is whether or not I can justify the cost of the other 3 boys. Look, I realise how nitpicky I can be. In some circles I'm known for being quite the critic. But the basis for all this is, if you claim your product or service can do this, this and this, and we pay you money, a lot of money, in exchange for it, then it should do those things at an acceptable level. We should get our money's worth. If something is done at a bare minimum, it should be pointed out lest it gets worse for the next thing. Because these big companies aren't your mates. They will cut corners and charge you even more for it, or make you jump through hoops in order to manufacture scarcity and drive up demand. At the same time, I do also believe there is such a thing as too much nitpicking, and something that doesn't match your tastes or preferences is not the same as thing bad. Which is why every year my frustrating list is ludicrously short. There might be things that annoy me about a toy, but not all of them are really worth talking about in any great detail. Speaking of which, here are the dishonourable mentions. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cartoon Turtle Van by NECA Toys. I bet this one's a shock. As I keep saying, the frustrating list isn't just about toys that are outright bad, like the 89 Grapnel launcher. That was legit bad, but at least it was cheap. Let me be clear, I love this turtle van, but honey, that love ain't unconditional, especially when I'm paying for it. I'm maybe 80% of the way there, yet the last 20% sticks out, especially in the context of the massive price tag. That 20% is pretty much the culmination of almost every frustrating point I've covered so far in this video. I've already done a separate video where I give my initial positive thoughts, but in that same unboxing, I highlight a few points that popped up upon further consideration. And the more I thought about those things and their context, the further up the list the van climbed. This is a substantial vehicle. That sort of tricks you into thinking it's a lot more robust than it is. At this point in time, I'm happy to say that nothing has broken off. Yet. But it does feel somewhat delicate. Every time I fiddle with something or adjust it, it feels as though I could push it a little too far. It's not a particularly flexible plastic, possibly brittle like the Grapnel launcher, and because the tolerances for some of the pressure fits may be a little off by like, I don't know, half a millimeter, things tend to squeak and creak and my anxiety skyrockets. Again, it's the toy versus collectible discussion. I'm cognizant of the fact that this isn't meant to be given to an 8-year-old to play with on the bedroom floor, bashing it into other toys. But even a collector displaying this isn't a one and done deal. There's still some level of handling or play to consider. Maybe you keep changing your mind in how you want to display it. Maybe you're rearranging your displays. Maybe you're a toy photographer and you're trying different poses. Or maybe you're moving house. It doesn't need to be indestructible, but let's say on that last one, requiring less bubble wrap would be nice. I saw at least one person on Reddit complain about the front seats coming loose as they were unboxing it. They're not meant to, by the way, so it's not just my imagination. The main concern for me is the turret chair. It's attached to this door by a pair of nubs that go into the keyhole slots, and for my money, I'm not very confident in them staying intact every time you install or remove the chair, because they seem very narrow at the point where they should be strongest. That moves us on to the next issue of design choice. Again, with this turret, every time you close this door, you have to remove the chair. Actually, you need to remove the chair every time you want to open the passenger side door. That leaves you with a significant component that's loose. Now, you can store it in the back, you can set it aside elsewhere on the shelf, or you can keep it in whatever accessory storage system you set up for yourself. Not exactly a major deal breaker, just a minor nuisance because, things can get lost. Besides, there are already spare parts to keep track of for this. But then I found out there's a third-party turtle van out there with the slightly rounder features, and their turret has been designed to fold up and be compact enough to fit inside without removal. Admittedly, it's not attached to the swing door, but it's still a solution. When you consider the price tag of the NECA release, all of the detail and consideration, the spare pieces, like this folded up turret that goes on the opposite ramp, even delaying release and going back to modify the roof thanks to feedback, you start to question what considerations went into this just for them to say, make it removable. Did they consider a fold-up design? If they did, was it going to increase the cost? If so, would we need to take out an actual car loan like you do for the Super 7 version? I will completely admit, had the third-party version not existed, I would have just assumed that a folding turret seat was way too hard. Knowing it's possible annoys me about the what if of it all, what we could have had. Perhaps the weirdest and most irksome design choice has to do with the use of button cell batteries to power the head and tail lights. I dislike button cells in general, but I also recognise their importance when it comes to smaller devices and the like. But look at this bloody thing! There are parts of this van large enough to fit multiple AA's. Hell, the front seat looks like you can install C batteries in there. So why the need to be precious about space? Someone more knowledgeable or actually involved could swoop in and claim manufacturing costs and processes or some such, and I've got no way to dispute that. However, my question is still, why not make it use the most common battery around, whether it be AA's or AAA's? It's the type of convenience that makes all the difference to the overall experience. It's like the collectible equivalent of edging and having the other person get up and leave before you finish. I paid a lot of money for this. I'm enjoying this. So why the hell just stop there? Man, I'm glad my videos aren't being suggested to the little ones. Even with fewer contenders and potential candidates, the favourites list was surprisingly tough to decide on. I guess I say that every year, but this time it felt as though I had other concerns or priorities. Or quite possibly that nothing stood out in the same way they did in the past, because how many times now have I gushed over a set of Movie Ninja Turtles by NECA? For a guy who doesn't collect a lot of 1/6 scale, what 1/6 scale impresses me enough to talk about this time? Positive consistency is a weird first world problem to have. I don't think I'm jaded in the slightest. I still get joy from these things. It's just maybe I'm a touch distracted as of late. So before I go have a nap, here are the honourable mentions. Thundercats, Vintage Sword of Omens by LJN. This one's a little bittersweet because I was hoping to get it working before recording this video, but it's become a little more involved despite the fact that I've done one of these before. When I was little, I was interested in various different things. My attention span would jump from one toy property to the next, sometimes as a matter of getting older, sometimes because of a new cartoon, usually because of a shiny new toy caught my eye. Aside from Ninja Turtles and maybe Dino Riders, I never had any substantial collections of the one thing. I'd have a few Transformers, I'd have a few Ghostbusters, a few Batman toys. The least of them was the Thundercats. From memory, all I had was a Lion-O figure and the Sword of Omens. I think I've been able to reacquire most of my childhood collection so far. There are still a few outliers, but I've been able to either repurchase stuff or somehow find my actual originals in the weirdest of places. The Thundercats Sword of Omens is a repurchase. In fact, it's the second time I've bought one of these. The first one was really cheap and was a Chrissy present for my mate Sean. That one was really quite battered, and for some reason the pommel, or the battery cover, had been glued into place. That needed a lot of repair and restoration. This was in much better condition, but it too wasn't working. Well, it was in much better condition before I started to try and repair it. The pommel pops off just fine, but like some of the toys back then, the seams between the two halves, I don't know, they've really been glued together. It's not particularly modular. Using what I have has not been as successful as I would have liked, but you know what, I'll get there eventually. With that aside, I felt a heap of nostalgia just flood over me. I was 2 when this toy was released in the US, and knowing how stuff got delayed in Australia back then, I was probably 4 or 5 by the time I got this. Out of all the toy weapons I had back then, this was the coolest. I think my last proper memory of that sword was the main sword went missing, probably given away, but for some reason I still had the pommel rattling around in one of the many junk drawers when I was a teenager. It was back in the 90s. It's long gone now. I think I searched all the old storage for it because a part of me was hoping I could buy the many cheaper swords on eBay that were missing this part. The repair of this was put on the back burner for ages simply because I got distracted by the next parcel that arrives on my doorstep. But even without it lighting up, there is a part-way sense of contentment to see this beauty once again. In the absence of a family emergency or me suffering heat stroke again, the reason this video took so long this time is because I was just simply enjoying doing sweet fuck all at the beginning of the year, which then manifested as writer's block when I did try to get off my ass. But I think my brain was trying to tell me something about my mental health. 2023 was a draining experience for our family. Being Asian, we don't give that away a lot, and the facades go up and we go about our business. Things did get better thanks to supportive people in our lives. I still had to focus on the personal work I do, which I won't get into here, but when I'm off of that, in my downtime, I just want to veg out. This channel isn't a job. It's barely a hobby or an ambition. It's an outlet for my expression, whatever it may be in that moment. If you do enjoy what I offer here, then please consider my tip jar at ko-fi.com/oldtrenchy. And of course, remember to like, share and subscribe and you know, follow me on all the other socials where I might be more active. By the way, thanks for watching, and as always, here's hoping for a great year ahead.